welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Thanks for joining. And what we're going to be doing today is signed, sealed, and remembered. And we're going to take a look at Elvis's Aunt Retha, the sister of his mother Gladys. But before we get there, we're going to take a look at a very special document. It's a document about Jesse Garen Presley. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. Now, in our last episode, we looked at an insurance contract that Vernon, he made a change to an insurance policy. That's the form that we saw. So we know he had insurance prior to April of 1947, but that kind of nailed down when he moved to a certain house, 1010 Green Street, I believe. Yeah, 1010 North Green in Mississippi, or Tupelo, Mississippi. That was the last place that they lived. But we've got to rewind just a little bit because I've got a couple of documents that we've missed. Even though we've really just got started, we've already missed a couple, so I want to make sure we get them into the archive that we're building here of all of these Elvis documents. Hi, Marion. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. Hi, Terry, as always. Thanks for coming. Definitely appreciate it. I think you guys are going to enjoy today's episode as we look at two documents that do play a role in Elvis's life. So this picture that we can see on the screen, this is Elvis probably about, I'm really not sure. I'm thinking about 7 or 8, maybe slightly younger even. He's wearing a pair of overalls. And I think this is a really rare picture because I don't remember readily seeing it before. So I thought you guys might enjoy getting a look at it. Now let's take a look at our first document. This is connected to the birth certificate and the doctor's report of birth that we saw in the very first episode of this series, Signed, Sealed, and Remembered. This is the standard certificate of death. And this is the form that connects to Jesse Garen Presley. So when we went over the two birth records, we could see that Elvis was a twin. So we could see that Jesse Garen was reflected in the record, but he wasn't really there. It did indicate that Elvis was the second born and that Jesse Garen would have been born prior, but it didn't name Jesse, and neither of those was Jesse's form. And Marion's saying that Elvis doesn't look very happy in this picture and that she's never seen it before. Yeah, he didn't look especially happy. And Terry's agreeing that he does look a little sad. And so you got to wonder, like, when these pictures were taken, obviously somebody was there with a camera, and I don't think it was Gladys or Vernon while they lived in Tupelo, at least. So it would have been somebody else in the family, and some of those occasions that they got together might have been sad ones. And we're going to talk about an awful sad one today. Or maybe he just wanted to go play with the other kids. It's a close-up of a larger, you can see a little more of his overalls in the full picture, and they're very clean. So I'm sure there was a picture planned, and then he probably got to go do what he wanted afterwards. So maybe, like all kids, he was ready to go for that. Or maybe he just got punished. Who knows? It's fun to think about. On this standard certificate of death, we're going to read through it like we do all the forms, and we're going to see if there's anything that we can learn. And this one says it's for the Bureau of Vital Statistics. So the birth form was for the Bureau of Commerce. Um, so if you're alive, I guess you go to the commerce stuff, and if you have passed away, because this wouldn't be just for stillbirths, this is for all deaths, then you become just a vital statistic. At least that's the way it was in Mississippi. And so the standard certificate of death, Mississippi State Board of Health, state file number, and here there's a handwritten, I can't really tell exactly what it says, but I think it says something H. So I can't really make out those first two letters, but I think the second one's an H. And then J. Hunt, I believe, and I believe that's Dr. Hunt. But I could be reading those completely wrong, and it might say like T. Trenton. I really can't tell based on the handwriting in this particular copy. And then over at the side, it says 9-. So I don't know if that was the state file number or that was just another notation. I've got no clue. So to go further into the form, it says place of death, and that's filled in County of Lee, and then registered number is blank, and voting precinct is E. Tupelo for East Tupelo. The full name, infant of Vernon Presley. Now, Presley is spelled incorrectly with 2 S's. So Jesse does not get a name on his form. On this form, he is not Jesse Garen. I'm not sure if the doctor knew that his name was Jesse Garen. I think in one of the stories, it does say that Vernon told him that, but I don't think that was reflected on the other form that we saw, that we know for sure Dr. Hunt filled out. And of course, I don't believe we ever get to see Dr. Hunt's notes. I'm not aware that those notes still exist. But here on the form, it's infant of Vernon Presley with 2 S's. And then there are some places where it's not filled out. Like number 3, sex. So this does not even indicate that this was a boy. It just leaves it blank. Number 4, the color or race, it doesn't indicate. And then 5 is single, married, widowed, divorced, write the word. So had me confused there for a second, but this form is for everybody, of course, not just infants. So whenever you passed away in your life, they would fill in whatever you were. So in this case, he would have been single. But again, that's left blank. Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. Then we go down to blank 6, and it says date of birth, January 7th, 1935. Now, this is odd because he was born on January 8th, 1935. But it was very early in the morning, and we know that according to the birth certificate, or the doctor's notes, I don't remember which now, but that it was around 4:30 in the morning that Elvis was born, so he would have been born before 4:30. But here it indicates January 7th. So that makes you wonder who actually filled this form out. If it was the doctor, he's made, a fairly terrible mistake here, as well as not putting the name of the child if he knew it. Unless you didn't do that for stillborns. Maybe that wasn't done. Because then we go down to blank 7, and it's asking for an age, and whoever's filled this out has handwritten in stillborn. And then we go to blank 12. And Terry's saying it's a very basic death certificate. Yep, very basic, but still a lot of information in here. Number 12 is the birthplace is Mississippi. But for whatever reason, they don't actually put Tupelo. And then they ask for the father's name in blank 13, and it's Vernon Presley. Again, it's got 2 S's, so it's misspelled. And then we get to 14, father's birthplace, and that's also filled in as Miss for Mississippi. And then we get to 15, mother maiden name, and this is filled in Gladys Smith. So unlike his birth certificate, they at least got her last name, her maiden name correct on here. I guess they didn't ask for her middle name, so they've left out love, but they've misspelled Gladys, and instead of using a Y, it's got an I. And then the mother's birthplace is also Miss for Mississippi. And the informant and address, so this is whoever informed, I'm assuming whoever filled this out, which would indicate maybe it's not Dr. Hunt, and that would mean that the note at the top doesn't say Dr. Hunt, and it says something completely different. Totally possible, because I cannot read it. The informant and address is Vernon Presley, East Tupelo. So if this is not Dr. Hunt who filled this out, just as it was not Dr. Hunt who filled out the birth certificate, that would kind of indicate that on the same day, because it does not, there is no date of completion on this form. That would indicate that on the same day, Vernon walked over to some other room in the building, or maybe even the same clerk, and or maybe just a different window, and he completed a certificate of death for Jesse Garen, which would again make you wonder why there's not a name there. But if he did this with the state, it would make sense that he did both of these on the same day. But again, no way to prove that, just some thoughts I'm having. Do you guys have any thoughts or opinions about any of this? Feel free to get it into the comments, and also the chat, and we can definitely talk about it. Everybody's opinion is welcome here. And I love to see those comments. I actually received an awesome comment yesterday that was a correction to a picture that I had in yesterday's episode. So we're going to see that correction hopefully in tomorrow's episode. I'm going to explain what I got wrong and what I've been able to learn from that. Well, I've learned a lot of new stuff. Okay, to get back to this certificate, the informant address is Vernon Presley, East Tupelo. Now, what's interesting here is Presley is spelled correctly with only one S. So his name is misspelled twice. And then the third time, it appears that the same person filled it in again on the same form. They've now misspelled it, which I think is a wonderful testament to how easy it is for inaccurate information to creep into these forms, which have then informed future generations about this information, because we're about to get to a piece of information which must have generated with this form that we've all heard and we all know, and now we'll know where it came from. Hi, Keith. Thank you for coming. Appreciate seeing you again. So, and you're just in time. Anna's saying it looks to me like the medical examiner filled it out. Could be, but I don't know that the medical examiner ever saw the body. And according to this form, well, we'll see. Let's get there. It says that the number 18, the burial, cremation, or removal place, and this is really the big piece of information on this form, although there are others. This one is Priceville CEM, CEM, which is Priceville Cemetery in Tupelo, Mississippi. It doesn't say that, but that's where Priceville Cemetery is. And it dates it as January 8th, 1934. So because they got the birth date wrong, I think we might be able to assume that really should be January 9th, 34. Obviously, they've gotten the date wrong as well. They've got the year wrong. So this is supposed to be January 8th, 1935. But even then, I think it's supposed to be January 9th, 1935. Because I don't think they buried Jesse the same day he was born, but they might have. I have no idea, to be truthfully honest. And we are going to do a deep dive into this at some point in the future. But at this moment, I don't know. And Marion's saying, I read that Presley might come from the German name Pressler or Pressler with 2 S's, and their job was either something to do with money or working with leather. That's interesting. Because Elvis had a lot to do with money, right? Although Vernon had a lot to do with money, come to think of it. Although his father and his father's father, not so much. And a lot of the rest of the family, not so much. Or working with leather. There's a very interesting connection between Elvis and leather. And he was friends with a guy that really did a lot of leather, and that guy worked at Circle G. And I am wanting to do a sub-series on the live series all about Circle G. So if you guys think that would be fun to hear, let me hear that in the comments or the chat, and maybe I'll put together some Circle. I'd like to do Circle G from the moment it opened, or the moment he bought it, the moment he had his last little anything to do with it. And Nancy, hello Nancy, good to see you here. Happy National Doggy Day. I know that you're very excited about the National Doggy Day. Is that national here in the United States, or is that somewhere else? Well, it must be the U.S., right? Because you're in the U.S. And, all right, so the big piece of information here, Priceville Cemetery, January 8th, 1935, hopefully is what it's supposed to read. But again, it's very suspicious that whoever filled this out got that date wrong, because they're supposedly filling it out in 35. However, it is January of 35, and I'm sure we've all made that particular error of using the previous year when we're filling something out in January of the next year. And Keith is saying that Vernon did some time for check fraud because Gladys and Elvis were starving. Yes, Keith, and we've done a lot on that. We actually, in this series about the contracts, we looked at the petition that Gladys had signed, as well as the text from Orville Bean's letter that got Vernon out of prison. So we did a really deep dive into that. You probably really like those episodes. And now is also a great time for me to give my daily disclaimer that I don't know anything special about Elvis. I'm not an expert in any way. I don't have any qualifications. I'm just here having fun, looking at different Elvis stuff, showing it to you, and telling you what I think about it. And I welcome everybody's opinion, and everybody feel free to put it in the chat and the comments. All right, The Undertaker is W.E. Pegways, P-E-G-U-E-S, which is a name I recognize. I believe I've seen it in pictures of Tupelo from around this time. So maybe if I see one of those pictures again, I'll remember to bring that in and show us all. But I'm pretty sure I have. I think they were a staple around in Tupelo for a long, long time. And number 21 is medical certificate of death, date of death. So there's a separate side to this form. It's over on the right side, and that's the medical certificate of death. And it's got the date listed as January 8th, 1935. So it's possible they've listed the birthday as January 7th because there's got to be one day for clerical reasons, but I don't think so. Again, I think this is some rather sloppy record keeping that we're seeing here. It's also not signed, so no doctor has completed this. So this apparently did not go through Dr. Hunt, which again calls into question anything I've said about what was written at the top. I have no idea. And written over across it says property of Joe Savory, Tupelo, Mississippi, which I believe he's the gentleman that got this copy from the doctor's office or something like that. So is this real? Is this a forgery? I think that's something we have to ask because document's not signed. And even if it is real and came from the doctor's office, does it actually reflect what was sent to the Mississippi State Board of Health, or where did this come from? Did it come from the State Board of Health? Was this another copy of it for some reason? Is this the official form? I can't really answer any of that. All I can say is that this has been published in books and people believe it's real. And this is, even if it's not real, it's at least emotionally real to us because it does represent that Jesse's not on any forms, even his own form. If this is the form, he's not here. And as far as I'm aware, there aren't any others. Now, I did have this in my collection and wasn't aware that I had it. So I'm not sure how good that promise is, that just because I'm not aware of it doesn't mean it's not out there. And that's what I'm loving about doing the show, is that you guys can hopefully help me find stuff, or as I do more research and we find it, we'll be able to get it in here. Hi, Angel. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. That's really what I've got to say about the standard certificate of death. I did definitely want to get it in here because it's as close as anything we've got to Jesse in the document itself. So now it's part of the archive. It's part of the record. And Nancy's saying that it looks real. Well, I definitely believe it's a real form in the sense that this is the form that they would have filled out. But could somebody have gotten this form later or copied it and then, a blank form and then filled out whatever they wanted? Well, sure. And is it more likely that they would have done this form than another one? Maybe, because it connects to Jesse. But the fact that it doesn't have Jesse's name, again, leans in the favor that it's real. Because if it was a forgery, you think you'd at least get the name Presley right, and you would have got Jesse's name onto it. So it does kind of feel like it leans real. All right, let's go on to the next form. I can find my controls here. Okay. And if you scan through this form real quick, there's no name of Presley. So you might wonder, how does this connect to Elvis in any way? And there's also no date on it, which makes you wonder when it happened. There's one date, but it's not the date the form was filled out. So it makes you wonder how it could connect to Elvis in any way. Well, let's look at that. And Nancy's saying, because when doctors are in a hurry, they did that, they didn't sign things. Right, Nancy? Or it wasn't the doctor at all, it's some clerk at a government agency. And so for a stillborn, maybe they don't need a doctor's a note or a doctor's signature. And then Keith is saying, I always wondered what would have happened if Jesse would have lived? Would there be Elvis, king of rock and roll? Absolutely, everybody wonders that. So I think that's why that form is so important. And the other thing I forgot to mention about why the price bill is so important is if you go out there and check the internet right now with Jesse Garen and Priceville, you'll find a lot of stuff come up where people have gone to look at Priceville to try to find Jesse Garen, and some indicate they have found where it is. And I think Billy Smith has said that he believes it's in Priceville, but he's not sure where. And this would indicate, if it's real, that Vernon told somebody, the clerk filling this out, that he had buried his son the day after he was born, or possibly the day he was born, at Priceville. No marker or anything. They just had buried him. So that's just another, if it's real, which it seems like it's got, I would almost feel like it has to be, because otherwise it would really have that name Jesse on there in order to make the money from selling it. Seems like strong evidence that it really was Priceville. Now, it's also possible Vernon might have fibbed about Priceville, because maybe he buried him somewhere else and it's illegal to bury him outside a cemetery or something, and he didn't want to run afoul of the law, or maybe he thought that. I mean, again, because we weren't there and I have no idea, I don't want to, everything I'm saying is speculation. What we know for sure is what's on the form, and the form seems to indicate that Vernon said Priceville. And Nancy's saying, I bet they never thought, or Marion's saying, I bet they never thought that the whole world would have a look at it one day. Right. And I think, I filled out a lot of forms in my time. It's just natural to make mistakes. It's just very, very natural. And when I look at other people's forms and I get angry because they've made an error, especially when it has something to do with me, I'll then look at other forms I filled out for other people, and I've got my errors in there. Because people don't think in terms of forms like this. They're pre-printed to help us think in these patterns, because we don't naturally think in these patterns. We don't learn things in these patterns, and we don't remember things in these patterns. And that's what's so interesting about the document itself. But what we're looking at here is a registration card for World War II. And it was completed either for or by, I believe portions were completed by, Retha's husband, who, Retha is Gladys's older sister. If you go back to the really early videos on my channel, there's one about Retha eloping. And she elopes and marries a guy whose last name is Lloyd. And she doesn't come back to the house. And Gladys thinks, wow, that's really cool. Here's a way to get out of a house. We're in a one-room sharecropper's cabin. 2 rooms, technically. Because it would have been like the shotgun house. But it's very cramped, very small. Been there her whole life. Her sister just flew away like a bird flying free. And she could do that same thing, but she has to basically do the same thing. So she does elope. Gladys elopes with a man. Turns out he's already married. It was terrible. Ends up back. There's a video about that too. But that's who Retha is. Now, eventually Retha separates from Lloyd. And she marries a new man, or a different man, who has a son from his previous marriage. And his name is Walton Green Riley. And that's the person who's reflected on this registration card. So he's married to Gladys's sister. So he is Elvis's uncle at this point in time that he fills this out. And he's filling this out because it's World War II, and the government has decided that people need to register for a draft because it needs to make an army. But it doesn't do this all at once. It holds a series of 7 different registrations, all with different rules, between October 16th, 1940, and December 31st, 1943. So at some point, if you were a male during this period of October 16th, 1940 through December 31st, 1943, you were going to end up registering for the draft. Almost didn't matter what age you were. You might not get picked because your registration might disqualify you, but everybody was going to register. It was a huge project. And it's because as the war went on, they needed more and more and more people. And Angel's saying that she's got to go back and binge those older shows. Angel, you sure do. In every single episode on my channel, whether it's these live streams or it's the shorts or it's the regular videos or it's even the posts, all of them have little Easter eggs, things, links to other places that you can go see stuff at, tidbits of information that have never been published in any other format. They're out there, but they're like this on a card like this. This isn't a published card. This is, a card. So just a record that you can pull from the government if you've got the right access to the genealogy tools that are out there right now, right? So available information, but not necessarily published. So everybody that loves these videos, no matter when you come in, I've tried to design everything so that you can start at any point and just work your way through in your own pattern, and you'll learn all kinds of new stuff about Elvis. The Gladys videos in the beginning are in somewhat of an order, so it is nice to start with the very first one about her dad, who is Bob, Elvis's grandpa, and then watch them all the way through, and you'll see Gladys grow up and get to the point when she's just before she meets Vernon. And Minnie Mae, Keith's saying he's wondering if Minnie Mae, Elvis's grandmother, ever spoke on the record about Elvis's brother. Not that I know of. Interesting question, but I don't believe so. But she was there, and she was right there in the house when he was born. She definitely held him. So to get back to this form, there were 7 different registrations for the draft. So the very first registration was October 16th, 1940, for men that were 21 to 35 years old. And this is the registration when Walton Green Riley registered, even though it doesn't say it on this card. And I'll show you how we figure that out here in just a second. Something else that's on this card is a serial number. It says 2672. It's pre-printed in large, bold black numbers. Then it's got his name, and somebody's printed his name. I do not believe he printed his name. I believe the registrar. Walton is the registrant. And the person who is gathering this information is the registrar. So there were men who came around and said, hey, have you registered? If not, you got to register right now. And they would fill your card out. You fill out a couple pieces and sign it. And then we'll see what else happens here. There's also an order number that's printed, and it is 801, and it's pre-printed in large, bold, red numbers. Then there's a new section, and it says address. Number and street are RFD number, and here it says RFD number 1. Now, what does that mean, RFD? That is a rural free delivery, is what that stands for, rural free delivery. And then in the United States, the post office began to deliver mail to home addresses in rural areas in 1906 under this program, the Rural Free Delivery Program, which means they brought the thing to your house, like a letter or a package, and they didn't charge you for it, and that was unheard of. And it caused a huge controversy at the time. Sounds like it'd be wonderful, but the shop owners in the towns, very upset, because the post office was in the town, And a lot of times the post office might be a shop that's in the town, so that the government didn't have to build a post office or invest in it at that time. They just pay, I'm sure you've seen Little House on the Prairie. And the mercantile store was the post office and the phone company for a while, because those organizations came to them and paid them something to handle those jobs. But that brought these people into town regularly, and then there would be more shopping opportunities. So the town's sales guys, the ones who owned the shops, they weren't very happy. But it stuck. And that's why we've all got free home delivery today, for however long it lasts, from the United States Postal Service. So elsewhere in this form, it says town, Tupelo, county, Lee, state, Miss, Fort, Mississippi. And then he's saying, I also wonder if Elvis would have visited his secret grave in private. He did go to Tupelo a lot, so it's possible he did visit. And then Nancy says, Keith, I think Elvis might have did that when he was younger, before he became big, or he might never have. And that's true too. We don't know. We do know he traveled back to Tupelo many times. All right, and what else we see on this form? In spot number 3, telephone, somebody has written none in cursive. I believe that writing is Walton Riley's. So I think that the registrar, he filled out everything that's printed. And that way he could just come and say, hey, I've got it all done. Can you fill out the rest of this? And we're done. And he would have filled this in if Walton had said, oh, well, I don't write. I can't, I'm illiterate and I can't write. Then the registrar would have filled this in for him. But since he could write and fill it in himself, then he's filled in this line number that starts with number 3, the telephone number. Age in years, that's number 4. He's 32. His date of birth is April 2nd, 1908. That's how we know what year he filled this out. Because he's 32. So it's in 1940. And because they required that that particular form be filled out by October 16th, 1940, we know it was right around that date. Now, he might have got a little bit of leeway on that, but the government really pushed. They had a period for this to be done, and October 16th was the last of the period. Rural areas sometimes came in afterwards, but we could pretty much rest assured he filled this out around October of that year, 1940. So he's also put that his place of birth is the town or the county of Lee, and the state of Mississippi, and the country of citizenship is filled in as USA. And then he's also filled in line 7. Name a person who will always know your address. And they ask for a title, the first, the middle, and the last name. And he fills in Mrs. Retha Smith Riley, and in blank 8, relationship of that person, that's his wife. So that is Elvis's aunt by blood, Gladys's sister. You can see the Smith as the middle name. That was her maiden name. And as far as we know, Retha did not actually have a middle name. So when she got married, then that gave her a middle name to use. But she's not using Lloyd, as you can see, or at least he's not using Lloyd. And then they're married because he's put wife and he's put Mrs. And Nancy's saying that she likes everything in paper back then, and now it's all stupid computer. Yep, and it turns out that these computer records don't really last as long as the paper records. Even when the paper was terrible paper and the ink was some of the worst, it tends to outlast a lot of these computer records. So then he's filled in that, he's filled in her address, and that's the same as his address, RFD number 1, Tupelo, Lee, Mississippi. And I'm guessing that he didn't fill that in, that he left it blank, and that the registrant filled it out, or the registrar filled it out for him when he handed the card back. And then he's filled out number 10, employer's name. And Nancy's saying, really, I thought that's why they went to computer. That's fascinating. Well, you'd think that is why they went to computer, right? But if you think back on the history of computers, they started it with like those punch paper things that if you didn't have them all in the right order, then you didn't get your program into the computer properly. And it was basically feeding out something similar to that, or it would print out something on an old-fashioned typewriter, basically. They would hook a typewriter to it. It's really what it was. And that's kind of where the dot matrix printers kind of evolved out of. But it would produce a paper record. It didn't remember anything. It didn't have the capacity to do that. There wasn't enough memory space. So it would just shoot it back out to you as paper. And then later, you could put it onto things like magnetic tape. But the magnetic tapes only last so long, especially the giant ones that they were using, and they're very dependent, like film, on environmental concerns. So if you got them outside of certain norms, then they just disintegrated or lost all your data. And then, of course, the means to read these old, which really isn't that old in terms of old, these magnetic tapes that we're talking about are less than 50 or 60 years old. We can read hieroglyphics right off of the walls of the pyramids and stuff, right? But we cannot always read these magnetic tapes anymore because some of the equipment no longer exists. So it's actually, by the time it lasts as long as the hieroglyphics, it will be completely gone. But even the ones that come after that, like the magnetic discs and stuff, they only last so long. CDs fade away, DVDs fade and rot. The SSD, which is the new thing, everything's stored on like a chip, which is amazing, and you can get everything onto a little bitty tiny card, and you can get just so much massive data on there. They'll eventually corrupt, and they do that after so many uses, like a light bulb, right? And then probably everything's gone if you haven't backed it up properly. So unless you practice a lot of backup routines, it's not like a library where you can walk in and 50 years later pick up the book and all the data's still there, although it may have become very fragile. So the reason for this is that we have practiced the paper stuff for thousands of years now, at least 2,000, and probably 3. And if you count the hieroglyphics and the cave painting, perhaps longer. So we've come to certain understandings about how we need to do these things to make them last for a long time. But with all of the electronic stuff, we're still in our infancy. It's just like space exploration. We barely know anything. In reality, flying itself, just flying airplanes around, we've only been doing it for 125 years, right? So we barely know anything about it, although we have lots and lots of man hours. But in the, once we've been doing it, as long as we've been writing, we'll probably all be flying just by flapping our arms. We will have learned so much, but that's just where we're at with the technology. It's like the medical technology. It just wasn't there for Elvis, but now it is. And we look back and we think, if only we could have put it there, right? And then Marion's saying that paper lasts for hundreds or thousands of years. At least the paper made before the 20th century does. Yes. And Nancy's agreeing that she liked everything on paper. And it did have a nice feel and stuff, but it was heavy. I do a lot of stuff on computer now, so I do love computer, but there's certainly a balance, and it all needs to be maintained in some format. But what's actually wonderful about today is that I did a lot of research before I published my first book, the only book, the one I did as an experiment, really. And I need, I wanted to know all this stuff about publishing, and I'm assured by Google and all the AIs, so whatever that means, that more paper books are sold today than ever before in mankind's history, even though you and I don't see bookstores anymore. We don't really see that. We don't see books as readily available in the public as we used to. Libraries remain underfunded and are less utilized than ever before, but more paper books are sold and shipped than ever before in history, which seems crazy, right? And so the amount of digital stuff that's done is actually a percentage above that. It's as if we've added another 25% of people reading and knowledge going on to what we already had. So there's actually a lot more knowledge running around the world in people's heads than there was, say, 20 years ago. And Angel's saying that as a retired nurse, she liked the paper charting much better than the computer also. So yeah, I think each has their place and their function, and you've just got to find the right use and the right case use. And then he's saying that back in the day, colonoscopies were unheard of and would have saved his life with a twisted colon. Very possibly. So, again, that's another great point, is that they didn't have the unobtrusive or unintrusive, non-intrusive imaging capabilities, but they also didn't have a good capability to get inside there even intrusively and take a look. But let's get back to this forum before I run out of time again today. I always end up running out of time with you guys, but I love it. And I do really appreciate the interaction in the chat, and I don't mind running off of course for a little while, as long as we all learn something and have fun together. We're going to look at employer's name here, and this is farmer. He says a farmer of Glenn McCullough, which means he's working for Glenn McCullough, which indicates to me he's a sharecropper. So Retha has married a man like her father Bob, who was a sharecropper. And if he's not a sharecropper, then maybe he's renting the land himself and farming it, and just working part-time for Glenn or something like that. I don't know that exact relationship, but he is a farmer, which was what Bob did. And it appears again that he has filled this in himself, and that he's put down his place of employment as RFD number 1, Tupelo, Lee, Mississippi. So he works right where he lives, basically. And, I didn't find much information about Glenn McCullough, but I did find information about his son. So I'm going to read you some information about his son that was published on Wednesday, April 8, well, maybe a day or two after this, but Glenn Long McCullough, 83, died peacefully at his home on Wednesday, April 18th, 2012, after an extended illness. A fifth-generation native of Tupelo and lifelong resident, he was born in the Tupelo Hospital on March 4th, 1929, to Glenn Lee and Margaret Long McCullough. So I believe this is Glenn McCullough's son, who Walton Riley is working for. And we see here he was born 6 years before Elvis, but he was born in the hospital. So his parents must have been doing fairly well as farmers. Growing up in Tupelo, he was a member of the Bachelor's Club and graduated from Tupelo High School in 1947. Now, 1947, that's the year of the last document that we looked at, where Vernon updated the insurance because they moved into 1010 North Green Street, and Elvis was 12 years old. That's when this guy graduated high school. And he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture from Mississippi State University in 1953. He served his country in the Mississippi Army National Guard and was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for leadership in Korea in 1952. And that's why those dates don't quite add up from when he left to when he got his degree in agriculture, because he also served in Korea in 1952. And Korea was a rough one. Junior Smith also served in Korea. Known to his many friends as Cotton, he was a lifelong farmer and businessman who founded McCullough Steel Products in 1974. So this guy that was born just before Elvis is a lifelong farmer. Everyone calls him Cotton. But he also founded a steel product industry, or a factory. A conservative Republican, he served in the administration of Governor Kirk Fordyce, a dedicated Christian, lay minister, and Bible school teacher. He was a faithful member of Lee Acres Church of Christ. He was a gifted storyteller, and he had a great love of history, particularly that of his home state. He loved his farm, and he was an avid bird watcher and gardener, and his survivors include his wife of 58 years, his 3 children, and his 3 grandsons. So this was a guy born just 5 years before Elvis, 6 years maybe, lived in the same town, grew up in the same place, had a very successful life. Perhaps a life that Elvis would have been envious of. And Marion says that she learned a lot about Elvis watching stuff on YouTube, she must admit. Yeah, I have too. And Nancy says, I love the Matt channel because I learned more about Elvis in family, or she's saying my channel because she's learning more about the family. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate that. I hope that everybody's learning something that maybe they haven't seen before and heard on another channel, that we're getting to some new truth here and getting it out there into the world about Elvis. Now let's talk about Glenn McCullough's grandson, who is the son of the man that I just talked about. And in May 2015, Glenn McCullough Jr. was appointed by Governor Phil Bryant as the executive director of the Mississippi Development Authority, where he served until 2020. And he lives in Tupelo with his wife, Laura, and their 2 sons. So 5th, 6th generation, I believe that is, of the same family living in Tupelo. And Angel saying that she loves all the information in this channel. Thank you so much, Angel. I really appreciate that. And Nancy saying, do you know if Gladys could have went to the hospital back then to have Elvis, even if they would have got billed? Well, I believe she ended up at the hospital because she was bleeding and they couldn't get it to stop. So I think she was there that night or early the next day. So I think, yeah, she probably could have. And they probably would have, but I think it was the practice of the people in her area in East Tupelo not to go. That they did things at home. They had their way of doing it. Minnie Mae jumped right up and got into it. And there was another woman from the neighborhood who I know was there, and I know her name. And I'm going to reveal it when we do the big deep dive. But she was there too. And there was another woman, and she was there too. So this was like the squad. And they would, the birthing squad, and they would go and help women in childbirth in the area. All those people that lived like below the hill there, over there in East Tupelo, and all those shacks. And Nancy's saying, yeah, they had the babies at home. And I believe my own great-grandmother had 19 kids at home. Same one that lived in the shack that was very much like the big house that I talked about in an earlier episode. I believe she had all 19 at home. So to get back to this form, I thought that was a fun little aside about the people who lived in Tupelo and are connected to the form. This form says, I affirm that I have verified above answers and they are true. And it says registrant's signature, and Walton Riley has signed there. It appears he has personally signed in cursive pen that matches the other cursive writing on the form. Now, what we don't have here is the back of the form, but I can show you what the back of the form would have looked like. And this is what it would have looked like, something similar to this. They were all printed, different printers, slightly different, but this is the registrant or registrar side. This is the guy who's filling the thing out. He has to fill out a little report. And, well, hang on. I have missed something on the form. Over here on the side, on the far left side, it says Route 1, RTE number 1. And then it's hard to read here, but it says Belden, Miss, for Belden, Mississippi, and it says 1-11. Now, I don't know what the 1-11 means. I think the Route 1 is referring to the RFD number 1, and that Belden is an unincorporated community in Lee County that is mostly located within the city of Tupelo. So it's some kind of place that's in or around Tupelo that is not part of Tupelo, but the post office services it. And that is some kind of indication of where exactly it is, to help whoever would use this card to find this registrant. So if we look at the back of this thing again, we can see that there's places for a registrar to put the race, the height, the weight, eye color, hair color, complexion. It's already got stuff filled out for complexion like sallow, light, ruddy, dark, freckled, light brown, dark brown, black. I don't know how you distinguish some of these, but this guy would do it. Whoever's filling out the card, put a check mark. Hair was blonde, red, brown, black, gray, bald. And eyes were blue, gray, hazel, brown, black. There were some blanks, so I guess you could write in something and check it. And your races were white, Negro, Oriental, Indian, and I think that's Filipino. Yeah, Filipino. So for some reason they were tracking Filipinos at the time, which I find interesting. And of course, some of these words we wouldn't use today, like Indian or Oriental. I'm sure Indian is referring to Native American, and Oriental is referring to Asian, and Negro is referring to African American. So probably the only word here we'd still use is white, maybe Filipino. And Nancy saying 19 and that she had one and thought it was hell at the hospital. Yeah, I don't know how my great-grandmother did that, but she had a lot of kids. And she taught school in a one-room schoolhouse. So she was a very accomplished person. Let's take a look at what else I got to show you before we're out of here. We've only got a couple of minutes left. This is Retha. We're going to actually finish her story in the next episode. That was the document, but it doesn't really tie up the story that I want to tell you about Retha and how she was connected to Elvis's life and some other side notes on that, because Retha affects Elvis's life for the rest of his life, as well as Gladys. And yeah, so we're going to get to this story in the next episode. So I hope you guys join me for that one. Probably going to go back and do another mystery of August 16th so that I can get my correction in there and we can move forward a little bit. I got a couple of video pieces to show you on that one, and then we'll be back to the contract signed, sealed, and remembered series, so that we can kind of attack Elvis's life from both ends, the very beginning and the very end, and hopefully as we push through the contract series, we'll understand more and more of what we're looking at in the August 16th series. And Nancy says that she looks like Gladys. Yeah. And Nancy's asking who that is. That's her sister Retha. That was her older sister, and the one who eloped, and that Gladys patterned herself after a little bit, kind of the wild one. And we're going to learn what happens to her. But we know she's real, and we know where she was because we've seen this form. And although the form that's up here is really somebody else's form, just so we can see what the back looked like. And so this card, you notice is vertical here, and the other card was horizontal. So they printed one side horizontal and they printed the other side vertical. You know, you just twisted the card and filled the rest of it out. I'm sure that made it difficult to fill this thing out, though, when you're out in the field. All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming. I will see you all again on the next episode. Until then, everybody keep on taking care of business.